This conference will now be recorded.
Just wanted to make sure you can still hear and see me all right, Scott.
Yep, you're good to
Everything
go.
good? Okay,
Yep.
awesome. It looked like my internet went out there like right before I started, so I'm glad it's back. Well, hi everybody. My name's Kaylee. I'm a park ranger here at the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center in Duluth. I've been a park ranger here for just about 2 years now, and today we're going to be doing a little talk about ladies in waiting, or the ships that are in long-term layup across the Great Lakes. There's lots of them, so we have a lot of fun stuff to cover. So a little outline of what we're going to be going over today. We'll try to define what a long-term layup means for a vessel, apply that to some definitions, or apply that to some examples across the Great Lakes. We'll discuss a bunch of the vessels that are currently in layup, as well as some notable examples that are no longer with us, past and present. We're also going to talk a little bit about what I call working layup. So you're laid up, but you're doing something else as a boat. And then one of the last things we'll talk about is the different ways that a ship can leave layup as well. One quick thing to keep in mind is that obviously I work for the Corps of Engineers here at the Visitor Center. I don't work for any of the shipping companies. So talking about the fate of a lot of these vessels, lots of information out there of varying quality. So I'll try not to speculate too much. We'll not get into the rumor mill. And I do ask that you do the same for me during the question and answer portion that we'll have a little later on. So first things first, long-term layup. What is it? So layup is basically defined as when a ship is idle for a period of time. We know that we always have winter layup. So up here on the Great Lakes, the Sulaks will close down in January, then reopen in March. So sometimes boats will go into layup a little earlier than that, a little earlier in December. Maybe they'll come out a little later in March or into April. Layup only becomes long-term when you pass an extended period and you don't have a certain end date. So for today, we're going to be talking about things considered long-term layup once you hit the 2-year mark, generally, if you don't have something in the future to look forward to get out of layup. So there are lots and lots of reasons that ships can go into layup for the long haul. This is just a whole bunch of them. Usually, if something is going into layup, they're going to be in there for a combination of factors. So you can have your economic reasons, you'll have a recession going on, maybe there's a lack of cargo, so a particular vessel isn't needed at a particular time. Maybe we have the boat in layup and it's just sitting there because scrap prices are too low and the shipping company wants to wait for those prices to go up a little bit before they sell. Sometimes you'll see a ship going into long haul because layup because it's going through a change of use. So maybe in the future they're going to turn it into a tug barge. Maybe in the future they're going to change it in some way so it can be used for something different than it originally was. A lot of ships that we see in long-term layup are in there because their infrastructure is getting really old. Repairs might be too costly. You'll have new ships that are replacing old ones. Maybe there's some kind of strike going on. And then overall, maybe companies are just waiting to see what the future holds. Maybe they don't need the ship right now, but they could use it a little later on. As you know, there used to be way more boats sailing on the Great Lakes. Obviously, part of this is because we have bigger ships that can haul more cargo and they're faster now. Kind of a fun fact that I found while doing some research for this is that during the 1986 shipping season on the American side, there were around 45 bulk cargo vessels, where in the late 70s there were 120, and then there were more than 500 that were operating just after World War II. Today, Scott did the math for me yesterday, and we have 46 bulk carriers currently working on the Great Lakes in the American fleet. So not too much change from that 1986 number, which is kind of interesting. Now we'll get into the meat of it. So ships that are currently in long-term layup. Before we go into the backgrounds of the specific ships that we're going to be talking about, here's just a quick visual of where a bunch of our spotlighted ladies in waiting are currently berthed. So up here at the head of the lakes, we have the Edward L. Ryerson, and then way more down on the lower lakes. Lake Michigan has like 4, Lake Erie has a couple. So lots of places. And generally, when you're talking about where a ship is laid up, usually it's just like a dock the company owns, somewhere they can store it for cheap if they don't have a specific end date for usage on there. So first, we'll talk about kind of everyone's favorite ship to gossip about, the Edward L. Ryerson. So the Ryerson was originally launched in 1960. And as you can see with that little years laid up portion, the Ryerson has had an extensive history of being laid up. The 86-87 season, 94 through 97, she was at the wall, 98 to 2005, and then 2009 until currently she is still in long-term layup in Fraser Shipyards up here in Superior, Wisconsin. So one of the reasons that the Ryerson has been vulnerable to these extended layups is that one of them being she doesn't have a self-unloader. And then another one is that she has a smallish cargo hold, and it's kind of oddly shaped. I'll have a picture of that on the next slide here. A little bit of an example for you. The American Mariner, still sailing today, is the same length as the Ryerson, a little wider, a little deeper, but she has a cargo capacity of 37,300 tons. The Ryerson is only 27,500 tons, so a little bit smaller. She's been laid up in Sturgeon Bay, but most recently she's just kind of been bouncing around the Twin Ports at different slips, again, currently at Fraser Shipyards. There has been some well-documented photographic evidence of activity around the Ryerson at Fraser this winter, but nothing has been officially announced by Central Marine Logistics at this time. So that's kind of where we'll leave that one. Here's your bonus picture of the cargo hold here. As you can see, it's kind of boxy, kind of square. Self-unloaders usually have cargo holds that are a bit of a V shape, just so that the cargo can get down into the self-unloading system. Ryerson's very boxy. So if they were to do the major repairs to get a self-unloading system on the Ryerson, those would be pretty major. So a lot of work, a lot of money, kind of who knows. Next up, down in Chicago, we have the CTC number 1. She was built as the McIntyre in 1943, one of the 16 maritime class ships that was used during World War II. During her career, this ship has had many different names: Frank Burnell, the Steelton, just hull number 3, and then also the Pioneer. She's been a cement storage vessel from 1982 to 2009, and then 2009 she was decommissioned for cement storage and has just kind of been chilling in the Calumet River. She was purchased by Grand River Navigation in 2010, and they announced plans to tow and scrap the vessel in 2020. They were actually due to do that in spring 2020. Obviously, that was preempted by the pandemic, so there haven't been any updates on this ship since then. I've looked for more current news articles, but as far as I can tell, they're just sitting there waiting in limbo. Here's kind of an interesting pairing. A tug and a barge that have operated together. The tug Invincible, launched in 1979, and then the McKee Sons, which was launched in 1945. She was actually built as the Marine Angel, and she was used as a troop ship during World War II. They cut her down into a barge in 1991. Kind of an interesting design for a tug barge. As you can see, they still got kind of the pilot house and the front end on there, as opposed to just completely chopping that down. The McKee Sons, operating as a barge, she was originally paired with the tug Olive L. Moore, who's now operating with the barge Menominee today. They replaced that pairing with the Invincible there in 1999. The McKee Sons and the Invincible were kind of laid up around the same time. Invincible was mainly laid up because the McKee Sons needed repairs. They determined in 2012 that were too expensive to make sense at the time with what was going on in the industry. Grand River Navigation terminated the charter agreement that they had on the pair in 2014. The Invincible was actually towed to Ashtabula, Ohio in 2018 and was supposed to be rebuilt, have some accommodations made so that she could replace the Olive Elmore, pushing the Menominee, but haven't seen any updates on that recently, so that rebuild is kind of on hold. And the McKee Sons is also, she's at the wall in Muskegon, Michigan. No real updates on that either. Here we just have some interesting images. There is the McKee Sons actually operating, you can see there. And then the photo on the right there, that is when she was still the Marine Angel. She was actually the largest vessel to transit the Chicago River. That photo, kind of old there. So an interesting to get that through those bridges. I'm sure that was an interesting time. Next up, in my opinion, one of the more boring ones on this list, just because I love the Callaway, but there isn't a ton of interesting information as to why she's laid up. It's obvious. So launched in 1952, but laid up in 2021, just because she needs her 5-year inspection, and apparently there is some major steel work that is needed on that ship. So future plans uncertain, but nothing is out of the question, really. Kind of another popular one for the gossip rumor mill. We have the Roger Blau. The Blau was launched in 1952. Or 1972, excuse me. She was laid up for a while between 1981 and 1987, and then has been in layup since 2021 because February 1st, 2021, there was a fire on the Blau while she was sitting in winter layup in Sturgeon Bay. There was major damage to the unloading system, to the engine room, so just lots of bad stuff on the after end of the vessel. She was towed to Conneaut, Ohio in late October of last year, so 2022, sitting idle there. There was a lawsuit that was published on February 2nd of this year by the hull and machinery underwriters of the vessel, and the kind of verdict of that was that the Blau has been declared a total constructive loss. Repairs for the vessel would exceed $50 million, which is a little much. So no imminent scrapping plans have been announced, but the Blau will not sail again in her current state, is just kind of the way that shook out. This is my favorite on the list, the John Sherwin. So the Sherwin is a very interesting interlake vessel now. Launched in 1958. She has been laid up since 1981, and she has not sailed since then. So I believe it was 2004 that she passed the halfway mark. She has now been laid up longer than she ever sailed. She was lengthened by 96 feet in 1973. And then she's actually been an interesting example of pretty much every kind of way that you can be laid up to be laid up. So she's been used for parts. In 1988, they took the bow thruster engine from the Sherwin and put it on the Herbert C. Jackson. And then the thruster engine from the Jackson was later repaired, and they keep it in the cargo hold of the Sherwin now, from what I read. She's been used as a grain storage barge, docked near CTC number 1 in the Chicago River. And then in 2008, there were actually rumblings and rumors that they were going to convert her to a self-unloader and repower her. It was 2008, so that didn't end up happening. They towed it to Base Shipbuilding in Sturgeon Bay, but they removed the steam turbine engine and then towed it right back to Interlake's dock in Detour. She sat there since 2009. She still does today. They use her for some spare parts for Interlake boats, but other than that, she's just chilling. So yeah, she's been laid up pretty much everywhere, and a very limbo status. I love the Sherwin. I have dreams that she will one day sail again, but that's probably not the most realistic thing in the world. Next up, another one that's entered long-term layup semi-recently, we have the Tecumseh. She was launched in 1973. And fun fact, she was originally a salty working on the ocean. She carried sugar for CH Sugar from Hawaii to the mainland United States as the Sugar Islander. You can see that in the lower of the two images there. The Tecumseh was purchased by Lower Lakes Towing in 2011, sailed on the Great Lakes from 2012 until 2019. She had a major engine room fire while in the Detroit River. Everything was fine for the most part, but not fine enough for her to be sailing yet. She was towed to Ashtabula in March 2020. Again, bad month, so her future is uncertain as well. Next up here, this is the American Valor, aka currently known as the Valo. She was launched as the Armco in 1953. She spent the 84 to 86 seasons laid up, and then laid up for good in 2008, sort of. So she has changed hands quite a few times. She's in Toledo as of right now. Sold in 2017 from the American Steamship Company to Algoma Central, who they're Canadian. They didn't need it named American Valor, so they're the ones that shortened the name to Valo. Sold again from them to Lower Lakes Towing in 2019. And they actually did originally announce plans to return the Valo to service to replace the Mississauga, who was scrapped in 2021. That repowering project was also supposed to begin in 2020, but that project was put on hold, so the fate of the Valo, American Valor, is also unknown. And this one is a little different than our other ones. So the Spartan is a car ferry, not a cargo vessel like our other boats that we've talked about so far. The Spartan was launched in 1952, and she's actually the sister ship to the SS Badger. That's the car ferry that still runs between Ludington, Michigan, and Manitowoc, Wisconsin. They had a bunch more ferries in the fleet initially, but they were sold off for scrap over the years as train car and car ferries were needed less and less. The last three that were standing were the Spartan, the Badger, and then one called the City of Midland 41. The City of Midland was actually the superstructure completely cut down and was turned into a barge, which is now the Pier Marquette 41 that still operates in 1997. Spartan wasn't cut down, she just laid up. 1979, they didn't need use for two. Became unprofitable to run both of the ferries. The Spartan is very unlikely to ever run again, but they do use it to lend replacement parts to the Badger when things break on board, so at least she's being a little bit helpful to her sister ship while she's in her layup. All right, Scott, I'll toss it over to you for questions at our little midpoint here before we get into the next part of the presentation.
All right. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Kaylee. All right. Let's see. I'm going to share my screen here quick. So, as folks are kind of thinking up some questions that they might want to ask Kaylee and put in the chat, just a little bit talk here about the current status of our visitor centers here in the Detroit district. So currently, the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center, we've expanded our hours with the start of the shipping season. We are now open Thursday to Monday, 10 to 4:30. We still have that cell phone tour that is outdoors for folks when we're closed. You can find the QR code on all the different signs around our park for it. And then there is still a virtual online tour of our visitor center as well on the days that we're closed, and there's an online gift shop for when we're closed. For the Sioux Locks Visitor Center in Sault Ste. Marie, the park is open daily as usual, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. this time of year. There are online exhibits and information sheets since the visitor center is not yet open, but the visitor center will be reopening officially on May 1st. All right, and then another quick reminder on just reminding folks that this is our last program for a while. We'll be starting things up again with the Virtual Visitor Center in October once again, October 5th. And it will be an update on the new Sioux Lock that is being built there at the Sioux. And we'll be having an expert from the district talking about updates with that. And then, if you're looking for any other information related to us in ship watching, that is the information that we have on there on this screen. A quick update, I totally forgot to update this for the Duluth Superior to Harbors and Silver Bay area. We actually are back on harborlookout.com is the name of the website. It actually, the current website directs you to that one. But we had some issues with that website last year, so we had to create something temporary. If you can, we do have in the chat, you can find a form for writing feedback. Tell us what you thought of this program and what we can do better in the future. And we'll try our best to get awesome presenters like Kaylee and others on here. After that, I guess we'll kind of open up to some questions. Does anyone have anything for Kaylee? I'm just taking a look here. Let's see. Gary in the chat here asks, what are the costs to the company to keep a ship in long-term layup? Do you have any idea, Kaylee, on that?
Yeah, a little bit. That's a good question. So usually if a company is keeping something for like the long term, example, like the Sherwin or something like that, it's going to be decently cheap for them to do so, or else they wouldn't do it. So often they'll keep it at a dock they own. Example again, the Sherwin that is at a dock that Interlake owns. So Interlake Steamship Company doesn't have to pay rent to anybody. They can just keep it there. Basically, if you have it at a free dock like that, your only cost is going to be to kind of personnel. They would have someone work in security there just to make sure nobody's monkeying around. And then if they're doing any kind of like tests or surveys to see if it would be able to be brought back into working condition at some point, that would be another cost. But really, if you're in layup for long term like that, it would just be personnel costs more than anything. Shorter long term layup examples like the Case and J. Callaway, I'm sure they have somebody at least on board, if not on board most of the time, at least somebody checking in a little more frequently just to make sure like pipes aren't bursting, stuff like that. But yeah, that's a good question.
Awesome. Let's see here. I'm gonna scroll back, see if any folks have some more questions. Let's see. We can give folks a few minutes if you guys have any more questions out there. Oh, it looks like one of our coworkers at the Sioux, or either Sarah here, can't tell. She asks, with the current high cost of steel, does that make it more likely vessels will be sold for scrap?
I guess that kind of depends if they really feel that there's no more use that they can get out of it and that it should just go for scrap, like some recent examples that we're going to talk about in a little bit. I would say that that would affect it. Um, Usually, if you're paying very little to just hold on to it, it doesn't hurt to keep holding on to it. Maybe get as many parts off of it and stuff like that as you can before selling it for scrap. There have been not like a major amount, but some of the recently scrapped vessels we will talk about were done either very recently or are still being scrapped. So there is a little bit of a trend towards that, I would say.
Yeah, I would definitely say in the last few years we've had a lot of vessels being towed to marine recycling in Port Colborne because of the
Yes.
high scrap prices, I believe. And the JB Ford was recently scrapped here in port, and it took a long time for that to happen. Um, Another thing to consider, I don't know if you talked about this, Kaylee, I don't think you touched on it, but one of the reasons some of these vessels are kept um, or held on to uh, was because of the Jones Act and the fact that it's more expensive for American companies on the American side of the lakes to have new ships built. So it's better to hold on to older vessels and hopefully get the money to rebuild them because of that act, which requires that vessels in the American merchant marine to be built American build and American shipyards and all that.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Mhm. And to answer your question, Rick, yes. So we have been recording the presentation, so you'll be able to find that on YouTube on our district's YouTube page. When we get that posted, you can see the start of the presentation. All right. Another question here in the chat. Tim asks, what ports are equipped to unload the Ryerson's cargo hold at the moment?
Currently, that would be anyone that actually has the Hewletts. So that would be a you question, Scott, because I do not remember. It's like 2 Canadian ones. Is that
Correct. Yep.
correct? Yeah.
So when the Ryerson was still running, I believe it either was unloaded at Indiana Harbor when they still had cranes there. Those are no longer up, I believe, and they were also unloading the Ryerson at Lorain, Ohio, I want to say, with big cranes that are movable. Currently, today, if the Ryerson were to operate, they would only be able to be unloaded at Hamilton, Ontario, and Quebec City. And the Canadian side of the lakes, they still have several gearless or vessels that don't have any self unloading systems. So they currently unload those vessels when they're carrying iron ore and grain and other cargoes via those crane units. So that's always been talked about when folks are talking about with the Ryerson operating, where can they go? Currently, those are the 2 major ports, I believe, for the Ryerson to be unloaded without a self unloader.
Cool. Thank you. Good question. All right. Well, with that, and we will have another little question section at the end if you
Oh,
think of more. Yeah.
another
Ooh.
question just popped up.
Oh, yeah.
Captain Ray Sheldon was just asking in the
Oh, hi,
chat
Ray.
here. He was asking what scrapyards are in operation on the Great Lakes currently.
What scrapyards are currently in operation?
Yep, they're actively scrapping ships at the moment.
The only 2 that I can think of are Ascon Metals here in Duluth, which scrapped the JB Ford, which we will talk about, and then the one in Port Colborne. Is there a third, Scott, or is it just the 2?
Those are the only 2 that come to mind for me personally. Otherwise, they get towed overseas to Turkey
Yeah,
or
and I
India.
would say
So,
Port Colborne definitely does a lot more of the business then.
yes, Steve just
Oh, yep,
mentioned at the Sioux. Yep, I totally forgot
yes,
about
the
that one where the
Mississauga.
Mississauga is. Yep, correct. I
Thank you.
believe that's the Purvis Marine dock, if I remember
Yes, that's
correctly.
Purvis.
Yep, they're working on that right now. Um,
Yes.
hmm
Good catch. Thank you. All right. Woohoo. Well, with that, yes, we'll get into the second half of the presentation here. And we're going to talk a little bit about what I like to call working layup and then how a ship leaves layup.
All
So
right.
if you
So,
are a ship and you're no longer sailing, sometimes you're laid up, but you are being used in a different way. Ships that were never sail again, they aren't all necessarily sitting in limbo. We see a lot of vessels that have outlived their sailing days being used as various kinds of storage containers all over the lakes.
Kayla, can I
Yeah.
interrupt you just for a
Oh, for
second?
sure. Mhm.
Sorry, I totally didn't. I gotta have you share your screen. You.
Oh,
My bad. Just a
oh,
second.
I didn't even realize you unshared it.
Yep. So just a second.
No worries.
All right, you are now the presenter once again.
Um, there we go. Is
All
that
right.
Sean?
Yep, you're good to go.
Perfect. And don't worry, you didn't miss any fun pictures or anything. This is all I had up. So we see ships that have outlived their actual sailing days being used as storage containers.
Sorry about the technical difficulties there. It looks like Kaylee lost her internet briefly, so we will get her back. Just 1 second. Let me check in with her on. Let's see. Oh wait, looks like she's back here. Let's see. We cannot yet hear you, Kaylee. Just so you know. Always something. Always something's gonna go
Trying.
wrong. Awesome.
Am I back?
Yep, you're good.
Woo! All right. I knew it was gonna happen at least one more time. Scott, do you know when you lost me? Was it here? Maybe it was
Yeah.
here.
Yep. It was there.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So if you're leaving layup, it's either because you're needed again, woohoo, or it's time to go to the scrapyard. Oh no. We're obviously not going to be comprehensive. This is just some recent examples of the kinds of leaving layup you can do. So also up here in the Twin Ports, the JAW Eigelhart, which is a storage barge. It was originally built, launched in 1936 as a deep sea tanker called the Pan Amoko. So it worked on the ocean. It was rebuilt as a cement carrier in 1965, and it spent a pretty significant career doing that until 2006, when it was laid up to become a cement storage vessel in Superior, Wisconsin. It still works as a cement storage vessel to this day. It moved to become a cement storage vessel, replacing the JB Ford that did it initially. The JB Ford was an old ship, so she was launched in 1903. She was laid up for the final time as a moving sailing ship in 1985 because she had some major engine problems, likely partially due to age, because that's a crazy long time to be sailing. She was used as a cement storage barge in South Chicago from 1989 to 2001. Was towed up here and did the job from 2001 to 2006 in Superior, and then retired in 2006. The Eigelhart took over for her. She spent 2006 to 2015 kind of in waiting, so she moved around between a couple different docks in the Duluth Superior Harbor. She was finally sold for scrap in 2015, but the process at the Ascon scrapyard didn't actually begin until 2021. So that would be one of those cases where probably waiting for the markets to get better. The middle photo there is the Ford mid-scrapped. She is pretty much completely gone at this point. They made pretty quick work of her over there at Ascon. The ST Crapo is another former storage barge. She was launched in 1927. She was laid up as a working cement barge from 1997 to 2022. She was in Green Bay. She actually had a extra working layup. In 2005, they tried an experiment where they towed the Crapo from Green Bay to Alpena, actually loaded her with cement, and then towed her back to Green Bay. So they only did that, I believe, the once. So whatever they were trying out wasn't worth it, apparently. She was sold for scrap last year in 2022, and she is currently being dismantled in Port Colborne. Again, not a ton left of the Crapo at this point. Another recently scrapped one here, the Manistee. She was built as the Adirondack in 1943, was used during World War II. She had a brief little stint of long-term layup from 2001 to 2004, changing hands between a couple companies, notably Erie Sand and Gravel, Ogo Bay Norton, and then Grand River Navigation / Lower Lakes Towing. She was laid up in 2015 because the repairs that she needed outweighed the cost that it took to do the repairs. In Toledo, she was that same photo I used earlier, sitting next to the Valo. She was declared retired in 2015, hung out in Toledo, and was used for parts by other vessels until she was eventually taken for scrap, March 2022. And again, not too much left of the Manistee at this point either. Here is your recent example of going into layup with a big question mark and then coming back out, which is exciting. The Arthur M. Anderson, everybody likes the Anderson, launched in 1952. She had her little stint of time laid up in Duluth, Minnesota here at the Canadian National Ore Dock, and it was a big question mark for a period of time, but she is working today. That top picture there is when they were towing her from the Canadian National Dock over to Fraser Shipyards to put the finishing touches on her to go back out sailing. The Anderson actually came into Duluth here this morning, so she is very much a working vessel. And now, into our little museum ship section, I decided that this counts as working layup because, hey, they're not sailing again, but they are working. In Sault Ste. Marie, the Valley Camp. She was launched as the Lewis W. Hill in 1917. She was hanging out, laid up, I believe, in Superior, Wisconsin. 1966, her career ended. Purchased in 1967, excuse me, by the Sault Ste. Marie Historic Sites Group, and was towed to Sault Ste. Marie to be used as a museum vessel. And as you can see there, she's still a museum ship today. I toured the Valley Camp last summer when I was in the Soo. It is a pretty fun little museum ship. Another one here, the William G. Mather. She was launched in 1925, laid up in 1980. She spent about 1980 to 1987 in layup when in 1985, the company that owned the vessel, Cleveland Cliffs, stopped marine operations. So basically they stopped having as many boats as they did. Stopped with boats in general. They sold the Mather to the Great Lakes Historical Society in 1987. So she's in Cleveland, also a working museum that you can visit. And I guess I should mention, obviously, there are lots of museum ships that are like tugboats and stuff. We're only talking about the cargo vessels here today. Colonel James M. Schoonmaker. She's a museum as well. Launched in 1911. Had the same issue as the last ship where she was in layup 1980 to 1986. Owned by Cleveland Cliffs. Sold this one to the city of Toledo in 1986, where she is a museum today. Then up here in the Twin Ports, the last above water whaleback in existence, the SS Meteor, launched in 1896 and actually ran until 1969. She ran aground, went out of service, was purchased, repaired, and then taken to Superior, Wisconsin in 1971. She is actually not even in the water anymore. She is in the ground on Barker's Island, and she is a museum ship as well. And finally, I'll end with my very favorite, the William A. Irvin, close to my heart because my first job was an Irvin tour guide. She was launched in 1938, laid up in 78, where she spent a few years moving between random layup docks in West Duluth, here in Duluth. She was purchased in 1986 by the Duluth Entertainment Convention Center, owned by the city, to be used as a museum, and she also remains a museum today. So that was my quick little working layup section. I will say, as we switch over to questions for Scott, special thanks to Dave Schauer, Paul Sunoka, and Scott Bjorklund for providing photos for me of vessels that are around the Twin Ports area. And that's Sherwin pick 2.
Alrighty. Let's see. Thank you very much, Kaylee. And we will kind of go through. There were some questions that did pop up towards the end here. One good question someone had, Ron, said, are barges used for cement storage because other storage facility shortages, or are barges a better method of storage than any other methods? Referring to, like the Eigelhart in the Crapo that was just towed away for scrap.
That's a great question. I assume, and maybe you can speak a little better to this, Scott, that it makes the transfer process pretty easy because like when the Alpina comes up here to the Duluth area, pulls up next to the Eigelhart, they can just transfer it right from the Alpina into the Eigelhart. Um, is there anything more complex than that, or is it just another way to do it?
I think it's honestly just for extra storage when they have periods of time where they like the
Have a lot.
silos that they have at each port only can hold so much cement. So if you have a couple of vessels that you're not operating, but you can use for extra when times when it's a lot higher demand than in previous years. And I think Ron's right
That
with
makes
the storage facility shortages, but I think you're right too.
sense.
It can
A little
be
bit of both.
it could be a little bit of both, but I think it's mostly the storage. That's a good question, Ron.
Very good question.
And then there's another question on here. Let's see. Does the towing process look like? Is it one tug? How many people undertake that, and what are the costs? And to be honest with you, I don't know a whole lot myself. But Kaylee, if you want to have any thoughts.
Yeah, the only part of that I can really speak to um, would be like ones that we've seen get towed out of the Duluth Superior area. Just realized I didn't talk about the American Victory at all. Usually they do have one tug in the front, one tug in the back. I assume that that's just so you have better control over the thing more than anything else. As to costs, yeah, I'm sure it depends how far you're taking it. An overseas tow is probably going to be way more expensive than just taking it up to the Sioux. But yeah, it depends on distance, depends on time, things like that. That's a really good question.
Yeah, my general understanding of all that is that it's expensive, obviously, and it's dangerous because it's a dead ship tow. So,
Mm-hmm.
you need multiple tugs to operate it. Um, I remember hearing with the Roger Blau's tow that was risky with how big the Roger Blau is. It was the largest ship towed for a dead scrap tow, I believe, or a
They had
dead
terrible
tow.
weather for that too.
Yeah, but they seem to do okay.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding too with the American Victory is that on their way out, the boat actually came close to hitting the side of the wall. I think on their way out of the harbor. So those large vessels that are unpowered are tough to
Yeah.
keep control of. Um, let's
Definitely a few
see.
examples of overseas dead ship tows too, where the ship sank and the tugs
Yeah,
had to cut loose of it. There's a couple freighters at the bottom of the ocean, which is kind of Great Lakes freighters at the bottom of the ocean, which is interesting.
and I love how books would describe as like the ship fighting back. It refused to be scrapped. It decided to
Yeah.
sink itself.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Or running aground or whatever. But let's see. There was a comment on here that the Manistee actually hasn't been touched yet at marine recycling, but I'm sure they'll get to
Okay,
that
that was
next.
the yes. Thank you. We weren't sure this morning when we were thinking about it.
I knew one either that one or the Crapo was being
So
worked on.
Crapo's gone, Manastee's still chilling. Okay,
Well, the I think the Crapo is still there, but I
but
think they're working on it
less,
now.
less of it. Mid cut.
Crapo
Okay,
is
yeah.
mid cut up. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thank
then
you.
the Ojibwe is completely gone, I think.
Oh,
That
yep.
was another one recently. That one was a bummer. It's a
Mm-hmm.
bummer to watch vessels being scrapped, but it's the fact of the industry.
Mm,
And to be
it happens.
honest, recycling is good. Um,
It is.
any other questions folks might have out there? Oh, yep, and the St. Clair, yep, was
Mm-hmm.
also recently scrapped. So it's
Yeah,
been,
poor Colborne's been busy.
yep, with good scrap prices the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions out there? Anyone have any questions about um, any of what we talked about today? All right. Well, if there's anyone who has anything else that they can think of, I'm gonna switch it over to that last screen I had up earlier on the links. Once again, thank you guys for joining us today, and thank you, Kaylee, for presenting. That was an awesome presentation.
Yes, thank you
And
so much for sticking around, everybody.
mhm. And once again, we will be doing another season of our visitor center series here, virtual visitor center series next year, starting in October. So please come back when we get that started up again. And thank you to both our the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center, or excuse me, Lake Superior Marine Museum Association and the Visitor Center Association for the Sioux Locks for your support in this. And thank you once again. We'll see you guys in October.